Gary Lineker has presented his last ever match of the day after being forced to leave thanks to his support for the children of Gaza. This was his emotional farewell.
Alan, Micah, thank you. I suspect our paths will cross again very shortly. Let me take this opportunity to thank all of the other pundits that I've had the pleasure of working with over the last 25 years. You've made my job so much easier. Also, a huge thank you to those you don't see at home. The work that goes into making this iconic show is a huge team effort, from the editors to the analysis team, from the commentators to the floor managers, from the producers to the camera operators, from the PAs to the subs. Thank you all. You're the very best. Rather like my football career, everyone else did all the hard work and I got the plaudits. It's been an absolute privilege to have hosted Match of the Day for a quarter of a century. It's been utterly joyous. I'd like to wish Gabby, Mark and Kelly all the very best when they sit in this chair. The programme is in the best of hands. And my final thank you goes to all of you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for all your love and support over the years. It's been so special, and I'm sorry that your team was always on last. Time to say goodbye. Goodbye.
Well done.
Alan, thanks.
Well done.
I mean, I thought it was really touching, right? I mean, I watch Match of the Day when I'm at my dad's house sometimes. I'm not a huge football fan, so this is not the biggest news in the world to me that that's his last show. But from, he's been on it 25 years. I've seen a lot of Gary Lineker, presenting Match of the Day or the World Cup or whatever. And I think that clip just shows how foolish it was for the BBC to get rid of the guy, right? He's just clearly a nice guy. Audiences love him. There is sort of like a noisy minority of people in the right-wing press or on GB News or wherever who can't stand the guy. But the reason they can't stand the guy is because he's so engaging, because he's so likable, right? He seems like a decent guy who's not particularly ideological or political. He's like a competent, engaging person who can tell right from wrong. And I do think it is very telling that the thing which finally crossed the line, for the BBC, where they couldn't take the pressure anymore, was that he really objected to kids getting burned alive by Israel, right? That was why he had to go. Now, obviously, he shared a video that had a small emoji of a rat, right? So he was right to apologize for that. But the idea that sharing that, he's been one of the most vocal people when it comes to calling out what Israel are doing in Gaza from the start, from the very start. And that really matters. And it was really threatening, I think, to the Israel lobby that you had someone who is in people's living rooms every day, not every day, but every Saturday or whatever, not for being a political figure, but for being a nice, likable, relatable dude, used to be a footballer, very talented, now talks about football, who can also tell right from wrong. Like, they hated that. Obviously, the BBC have been looking for an excuse to get rid of him for ages, because before the Israel lobby hating that, the Tories hated that. And you've got people like Robbie Gibb, very, very powerful in the BBC, who himself was sort of wrapped up in buying the Jewish Chronicle, which is probably one of the most pro-Israel newspapers in the country. For some reason, that's okay. But they couldn't bear to have this likable guy who brings people together, who's great at hosting the football. Massive loss to the BBC. Match of the Day is not going to be the same next season. If ITV pick him up for the World Cup, the BBC are going to be like kicking themselves. They're going to be terrified that that's going to happen. Or Sky or Amazon or whoever. Hopefully he won't go to Amazon. But there we are. Kieran, I don't know if you're a big football fan, but I think watching that, sort of seeing how much it meant to Gary Lineker, how much it meant to, the guys co-hosting with him. Again, Alan Shearer and Micah Richards, they're not these sort of like raving political lefties. They're just people who were footballers, who inspired people at home, who can also tell right from wrong, who was sad to see someone who's clearly, the best in the business when it comes to football going because he objected to kids getting burnt alive.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, the least important part, I am a big football fan. I stayed up. I don't usually do this on a Saturday night, but I did stay up to watch. That makes it sound like I go to bed.
Yeah, what time do you go to bed?
It's
only at half 10, isn't it?
I'm usually out. I like to think I'm usually out.
So you mean you stayed in?
I stayed in. What am I saying? Sunday night, but bank holiday. That's why I'm confused. I stayed in and I watched his last match of the day. Yeah, thank you. And half an hour before the show started, he popped up. Gary Lineker popped up to say, join us in half an hour. And this is what you can expect. Right. And then he went off air and it went to BBC News. And the headline, because as we said earlier, some of this is starting to filter onto mainstream media. The headline was about the aid blockade. And the BBC was showing images of skeletal, starving, or emaciated children, babies, toddlers, and so on. And that really underscored for me the utter inverted morality, the utter depravity of the situation. So you've got babies and toddlers, and adults too, by the way, being starved to death or to the point of death, essentially with British backing. And then you've got a beloved television presenter calling the starvation out in very reasonable terms. Because he shared a video with an emoji of a rat, he is fired, essentially. I mean, nothing, to my mind, could be a greater indictment of the media establishment, the BBC, or the moral and intellectual climate of this country than that juxtaposition right there. Those two things side by side. And just to say, I mean, about Gary Lineker, away from the politics, if you like, Gary Lineker is unquestionably one of the best things to ever happen to English football. And he's unquestionably one of the best things to ever happen to the BBC. He, as much as anyone else, maybe more than anyone else, helped the BBC survive in the age of Netflix, Prime, and so on. And they're complete and utter mugs. They're mugs for getting rid of him. They really are. We were talking about it earlier. As if anybody, when the World Cup in 2026 starts, is going to say, oh, yeah, of course, they had to. It's not Gary Lineker presenting it. As he was, by the way, even though he'd stepped down from Match of the Day after this season, he was, I should have said and give context, he was set to present the World Cup next year. But because of the rat emoji, and because of speaking out about this genocide, he's been pulled from that. And the idea that anybody, any football fan or anyone else is going to say, yeah, no, that was the right decision. Of course, that rat emoji was beyond the pale in that video. Of course they're not. Nobody's even going to remember why he's not presenting it. They're just going to be disgruntled. And the quality of the shows, as you just said, Michael, is just going to be lower. It's going to be lower grade across the board. And that is because Gary Lineker exudes warmth and humanity. And that is what made him such a brilliant television presenter, especially in the context of sport, which, you know, sports people do their best when they become presenters or pundits or whatever, but usually they are like drained of any personality. They're droids. Gary Lineker really stood out because of his warmth and humanity. And lo and behold, that extends, it turns out, to politics and to, you know, people suffering in the world. The silver lining is, I'll end on the silver lining. The silver lining is that now he can say and do whatever he wants. He's not answerable to anybody. He has no paymaster. He runs Goal Hanger podcasts. That makes a lot of money. He's obviously minted anyway. He doesn't need to answer to anybody. He can post about whatever he likes, and he can talk about Palestine and other groups of people suffering in the world as much as he likes. And indeed, I see that already today on his Instagram, he shared the story about the Gaza mother who lost 9 of her 10 children.
Yeah, hopefully we can get him on Novara soon.